Pay attention to this security camera footage. Wednesday morning, Rangali Island, Maldives. The villa walkway camera, mounted at the base of the overwater jetty on the resort's South Island, captures the following at 6:19 a.m. A man walks out of Villa 14. Gray t-shirt, no shoes, no phone in his hand. He moves at a pace that is almost casual. Not rushed, not stumbling, not the gait of a man who has just experienced something devastating. He walks the full length of the jetty, 340 meters above water, the color of something that doesn't exist on land, and he sits down at the far end. His legs hang over the edge. The Indian Ocean surrounds him in every direction. The sky is still gray at the horizon, light bleeding in from the east. He does not move. He does not call anyone. He does not look back at the villa behind him. He sits there for 41 minutes. His name is Ryan Calloway. He is 34 years old. He arrived at this resort 4 days ago on his honeymoon. At 9:02 a.m., he picks up the villa telephone and calls the front desk. He reports his wife missing. Chelsea Callaway is found inside Villa 14 at 9:47 a.m. She has not gone anywhere. But here is what nobody knew yet, what the cameras outside could not show, what the investigation would take 11 days to uncover. At 1:31 a.m. that same morning, while Chelsea slept, a message had arrived on her phone. The sender was Ryan's best man. And those two facts, the man sitting motionless at the edge of the water, and the name on that screen, are everything. The Rangali Island does not look like a place where terrible things happen. It sits in the South Ari Atoll, roughly 90 kilometers southwest of Malé, reachable only by seaplane or speedboat. The resort occupies 2 separate islands connected by a 500-meter underwater walkway. The North Island handles arrivals, the reception pavilion, the main dining facilities, the standard villa accommodations set back among the tree line. The South Island, Rangalafinalu, is different, quieter, adults only. 17 overwater villas on raised timber platforms above the lagoon, arranged along a single jetty that extends into open water. The villas at the far end of that jetty are the most sought-after accommodations on the property. They are the most private. From the deck of Villa 14, the last villa before the jetty ends and the open ocean begins, you cannot see another structure in any direction. There is only water and sky. The villa's interior floor has a glass panel built into it, and through that panel, for meters below, you can see the reef in every color. Guests book this villa a year in advance. Some book it twice. Ryan Calloway had booked it 11 months ago. The resort operates a 94-camera surveillance system across both islands. It is one of the most comprehensive security setups in the Maldivian private resort sector, a fact the management takes quiet pride in and rarely needs to reference. Cameras cover every dining area, every pathway, every jetty entrance, every pool deck, every reception point. The walkway camera at the base of the South Jetty is motion-activated and time-stamped. It sees everything that moves between the main island and the overwater villas. What there are no cameras inside are the villas themselves. The villas are private. That is the entire point of a place like this. That is, in this case, also the problem. At 9:02 a.m. on Wednesday, the front desk operator, a 26-year-old woman named Aminath, 3 years into her tenure at the resort, the kind of employee who remembered guest names and coffee preferences and whether you'd asked for extra towels, received a call from Villa 14. She later told investigators that she knew within the first sentence the call was different. Not because the man on the line was panicking, because he wasn't. His voice was measured, almost formal, almost careful. He said, "I think something may have happened to my wife. I've been looking for her since this morning and I can't find her in the villa. Not, please help. Not, something is wrong, come quickly. I think something may have happened." As though the facts were still under consideration. As though he was reporting a scheduling discrepancy rather than a missing person. Aminath asked him to confirm his villa number. He said 14. She asked if he had checked the pool deck, the outdoor shower, the deck chairs. He said he had checked everywhere. She kept him on the line for 4 minutes and 12 seconds while she alerted the duty manager and resort security. During those 4 minutes, Ryan Calloway said nothing unprompted. He answered questions when asked. He did not fill the silence. He waited. In 3 years of emergency calls, Aminath had received 2 previous ones. Both guests had been barely coherent with fear. She said later that Ryan's stillness on the line, not distress, not chaos, just a kind of held patience, had stayed with her longer than anything else about that morning. She thought about it for weeks afterward. Resort security arrived at Villa 14 at 9:41 a.m. Ryan was standing at the villa entrance, still barefoot, still in the gray t-shirt. He did not lead them inside. He pointed toward the bedroom corridor and said, "She's in there. I didn't move her." Chelsea Callaway was on the floor beside the bed. She was still wearing the dress from dinner the previous evening. A pale blue linen dress that her mother Helen had helped her pick out in Fort Worth 4 months earlier, in a shopping trip that had ended with lunch and both of them crying in a restaurant booth over the fact that the wedding was actually happening. The dress was what Helen first asked about when investigators called her. She needed to know what Chelsea had been wearing. She needed that detail to make it real, and she needed it to break her simultaneously. The dress told her Chelsea had not been asleep when it happened. Chelsea had been awake. The patio doors to the deck above the water were closed and locked from the inside. Chelsea's passport was on the bedside table. Her jewelry was on her body. The wedding ring, the engagement ring, the thin gold chain at her throat that Ryan had given her for their first anniversary. Nothing had been touched. Nothing had been taken. This was not a robbery. This was not a stranger who found an unlocked door. Maldivian police were called at 9:49 a.m. While they were in transit, investigators pulled the Villa Walkway camera archive. 48 hours of footage. Between 11:17 p.m. Tuesday, when the camera last recorded movement, and 6:19 a.m. Wednesday, when it recorded Ryan walking out alone, the camera shows nothing. Not a shadow. Not a passing figure. The South Island's secondary cameras corroborate this with no gaps. 2 resort maintenance staff are recorded crossing the main jetty at 2:40 a.m. A routine task, logged, verified, covering a section of the property 200 meters from Villa 14. Neither approaches the South Jetty. The record is complete and it is unambiguous. Between 11:17 p.m. and 6:19 a.m., the only person to move anywhere near Villa 14 is Ryan Calloway. Walking out, sitting at the water's edge, not moving for 41 minutes, not looking back. Most people, when they first hear this story, land on the same assumption. A remote island, a beautiful, secluded villa, no security inside the room. A stranger, maybe someone who had studied the resort's layout, found a water entry point the cameras didn't cover, come up from beneath the deck. A robbery that went wrong. A terrible accident in a location where help is impossibly far away. A tragedy with no author except bad luck and bad timing. That was the first theory. It lasted approximately 72 hours. It was wrong. There was no stranger. There was no intruder. There was no water entry point. What happened inside Villa 14 on Wednesday morning had been set in motion 7 months earlier, in Austin, Texas. In a betrayal so total, so close, so woven into the fabric of Ryan Calloway's entire adult life that when he finally discovered it, alone, in the dark, holding his wife's phone in the middle of the Indian Ocean, he had 37 minutes before the cameras picked him up again. Those 37 minutes are what this story is about. Before Ryan Calloway becomes a defendant, he deserves to be known. He grew up in Beaumont, Texas, second of 3 children, in a house where dinner happened at the same time every night and nobody locked their bedroom door. His father was a pipe fitter. His mother worked school administration. They were not wealthy, but they were stable in the way that stability looks when it's been chosen deliberately and maintained with effort. The kind of household where broken things got fixed, where obligations got met, where the people inside it showed up for each other without requiring praise for doing so. Ryan absorbed that ethic the way children absorb the things that are simply in the air around them, not consciously, not as a lesson he could articulate, just as the baseline assumption of how a person conducts themselves. He moved to Austin at 19, enrolled at Austin Community College, transferred to UT for 2 years, left at 21 without a degree because he wanted work that felt real in his hands. He joined the Austin Fire Department at 22. Station 6 on East Old Torf. He passed the physical and written exams on his first attempt, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the 12-year record that followed. His captain, Marcus Webb, would later tell investigators, in a conversation that clearly cost him something to have, that in a decade of working beside Ryan Calloway, he had never once seen the man perform a version of himself. No performance for supervisors. No different behavior when he thought nobody was watching. Webb said, "The Ryan I worked with was the same person at 3 a.m. on a bad call as he was at the Monday morning briefing. Most people aren't. He was." Webb paused before adding, "I still believe that about him. What happened in that room, I don't have a framework for it. I've tried to build one. I can't." Ryan had started paying for Chelsea's engagement ring in January, 18 months before the proposal. He had found it at an independent jeweler on South Congress Avenue, a round-cut diamond solitaire on a plain platinum band, precisely the kind Chelsea had once circled in a magazine in the unconscious way people indicate what they actually want when they believe nobody is paying attention. Ryan had been paying attention. The ring cost $6,400. He put down $400 and arranged 15 monthly payments for the rest. He never told Chelsea. He never told anyone. His bank records, later examined in the course of the investigation, their contents entered into the trial record with a thoroughness that felt almost cruel, show 15 consecutive monthly payments to the jeweler, each identical, each quiet. The jeweler, Diane Okafor, spoke briefly to a journalist after the conviction. She said Ryan had come into her shop 4 times over those 15 months. Once to buy the ring. Twice just to look at it, to make sure it was still right, she said, to make sure his memory of it matched the reality. Once to collect it. On that last visit, he had been so nervous, he'd knocked over the glass of water she'd offered him. He'd apologized 3 times. She'd laughed and told him the woman receiving that ring was lucky. Ryan had said, "I'm the lucky one." He'd meant it in the specific way that people mean things when they're not trying to sound a certain way, not performing gratitude, just stating a fact he'd arrived at honestly. He proposed on the roof of their apartment building on the first warm evening in March. No photographer. No friends staged around the corner. No setup beyond Ryan standing there in the last of the day's light with a ring he'd been paying for since January and words he'd been finding since longer than that. He'd prepared a speech. He abandoned it halfway through because it sounded, in the moment of actually saying it, like a speech. What he said instead was, "I love you in a way I didn't know was real before you. I want to spend my life trying to deserve you." Chelsea said yes before he'd finished the sentence. The wedding was at a vineyard outside San Antonio. 160 guests. An open bar that ran 3 hours past schedule. A string quartet that played the wrong processional song and Chelsea laughed instead of crying. A laugh her mother Helen described in court, months later, as the laugh she heard in her head every morning when she woke up, the one she was most afraid of forgetting. Ryan's vows were 4 minutes long. He had written them in the Notes app on his phone during overnight shifts at the station, building them slowly, refining them across 3 weeks, until each sentence carried exactly its intended weight. He'd memorized them completely. At the altar he looked at Chelsea the entire time and never once glanced at his phone. Never paused to retrieve a word. Never broke the directness of his gaze. The line that had taken him longest to write, "You are the evidence that things work out, even for someone who had stopped believing they would," landed in the vineyard's open air and stayed there. 3 guests in the front row were openly weeping. Ryan was not weeping. He was simply looking at Chelsea the way a man looks at something he knows he is going to spend the rest of his life taking care of. The best man gave a speech that made the entire room stand up. Tyler Ren, 34 years old. Ryan's closest friend since 7th grade in Beaumont. When Tyler had arrived mid-year in Ryan's homeroom and Ryan had been assigned to show him around. By the 2nd week, they were meeting before school. By the end of that year, there was no version of Ryan's life that didn't include Tyler in it. They had gone different directions after school. Tyler to Texas A&M for a business degree, then into corporate logistics, but the friendship had held across distance and divergence the way some friendships do when the foundation is genuine enough. Tyler had moved to Austin in his late 20s and the friendship had restocked itself to full strength. When Ryan's father had a health scare in 2019, Tyler had driven 4 hours to Beaumont without being asked, showed up at the hospital with terrible vending machine coffee, and stayed the whole day. When Ryan's lease fell through that same year, Tyler had a key cut for his spare room before Ryan finished explaining the situation. At Tyler's own wedding in 2018, a marriage that dissolved in 2021, Ryan had been his groomsman. The best man speech told the story of the 4th of July party 3 years earlier. Tyler had watched Ryan see Chelsea across a backyard full of people and go immediately entirely still, the kind of stillness that only happens when something hits at a frequency a person's whole body recognizes. Tyler had seen Ryan's face before Ryan knew what his face was doing. "I have known this man for 22 years, Tyler told the room, "and I have never seen him scared of anything. Until that party. He stood there like he'd forgotten how to operate himself. So I pushed him." The room had laughed. Ryan had buried his face in his hands. "I pushed him across that yard," Tyler continued, "because somebody had to. And I am standing here today because he went." He raised his glass. The room rose with him. Chelsea wiped her eyes. Ryan looked at Tyler with the particular expression of a man looking at someone who has been woven into every important chapter of his life. 5 days later, Tyler Ren hugged Ryan goodbye at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. He told Ryan to enjoy every second. He told Chelsea she looked beautiful. He stood at the gate and watched them leave. That same night, the night Chelsea died, Tyler Ren sent a message to her phone at 1:31 a.m. from Austin, Texas. "Thinking about you. Miss you already." He knew exactly where she was. The Maldives sits 5 time zones ahead of Texas. When Tyler Ren sent his message to Chelsea's phone, it was 2:31 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in Austin. A normal hour. A workday hour. Not the small hours of the morning when judgment loosens and a person reaches for something familiar without thinking clearly. Not 2 a.m. weakness. Not a sleepless night. Not a moment that could be explained away as impulse overcoming reason. A Tuesday afternoon. Tyler was fully awake, fully functional, operating with complete awareness of what he was doing and making the choice to do it anyway. He sent the message without pausing, without calculating, without performing even the most basic arithmetic of the situation, that Chelsea was on her honeymoon, that Ryan Calloway was lying beside her in a villa above the Indian Ocean, that 5 days ago Tyler had stood in front of 160 people at a vineyard outside San Antonio and told every single one of them that Ryan was the best man he knew. He sent it the way a person sends a message they have sent many times before. That is the detail that matters more than the content of the message itself. For words, "thinking about you," "miss you already," unremarkable in isolation, devastating in context. But more devastating than the words is the absence of hesitation they represent. Caution requires the belief that what you are doing carries risk. At some point across the 7 months preceding that Tuesday afternoon, risk had stopped feeling real to Tyler Ren. The message was not a lapse. It was a habit. And it had been a habit long enough that sending it to Chelsea while she slept beside her husband of 4 days in the Maldives felt, to Tyler, like a reasonable thing to do. To understand the full weight of those 4 words, to understand why they sit at the center of this case like a stone dropped into still water, the rings spreading outward until they touch everything. You need to understand who Tyler Ren actually was to Ryan Calloway. Not the function he served. Not the title on the wedding program. Who he was. Tyler had arrived in Ryan's homeroom in 7th grade in Beaumont, Texas, mid-year, the new kid with no context and no footing, dropped into a social ecosystem that had been running without him for 6 years. Ryan had been assigned to show him around for the first week. Standard procedure, the kind of institutional pairing that usually produces nothing more than a week of polite awkwardness before both parties drift back to their existing orbits. That is not what happened. By the end of the first week, they were meeting before school. By the end of the first month, they were inseparable in the specific way that middle school friendships become inseparable, total, consuming, the relationship that shapes the template for every friendship that follows because it is the first one that felt chosen rather than assigned. They grew up alongside each other. Every significant marker of Ryan's adolescence had Tyler in the background or beside him. The first job, the first car, the particular education of learning who you are through the mirror of someone who knows you completely. Tyler went to Texas A&M. Ryan went to Austin Community College and then UT and then the fire department. They were in different cities for stretches of their 20s. maintained by phone calls and visits, and the kind of friendship that does not require constant proximity because the foundation is old enough and solid enough to hold weight across distance. When Tyler moved to Austin in his late 20s and their daily geography overlapped again, the friendship restocked itself to full strength as though the distance had been nothing more than a long pause. Tyler had been the person Ryan called when things were hard. Not one of the people, the person. When Ryan's father had a health scare in 2019, Tyler had driven 4 hours to Beaumont without being asked and without making anything of it. Had simply appeared at the hospital with bad vending machine coffee and stayed the entire day, talking when talking helped and being quiet when quiet helped, because 22 years of friendship had given him the ability to tell the difference. When Ryan's apartment lease fell through unexpectedly that same year, Tyler had cut a spare key before Ryan finished explaining the situation. There was no calculation in any of this. Tyler showed up because showing up for Ryan was as natural to him as breathing, as automatic as anything a person does that has been done long enough to stop requiring a decision. Tyler's own marriage, to a woman named Kristen he had met at A&M, ended in divorce in 2021. It had not been a clean ending. Tyler had struggled in the way that people struggle when the structure they built their adult life around dissolves and they are left standing in the space where it used to be. Ryan had been the person Tyler called from the parking lot of his attorney's office after signing the final papers. Ryan had driven to Tyler's apartment that same evening with food and no agenda, had sat on the floor of Tyler's living room for 4 hours while Tyler talked through everything, had said very little and stayed very late and driven home at 2 a.m. because that is what you do for the person who has always done it for you. That is who Tyler Ren was to Ryan Calloway. That is the specific weight the words best man carry in this story. Not a title. Not a ceremonial function. The closest friend Ryan had in the world. The person who knew him most completely. The person whose judgment Ryan had trusted without reservation across 22 years of accumulated evidence that the trust was warranted. And it was Tyler who had pointed Ryan toward Chelsea in the first place. The 4th of July party was at a mutual friend's house in South Austin in the summer 3 years before the wedding. Ryan had seen Chelsea across the backyard and gone immediately entirely still, the specific stillness of a person whose whole system has just recognized something and is waiting for the rest of them to catch up. Tyler had been standing beside him. Tyler had seen Ryan's face before Ryan knew what his face was doing. He had watched Ryan stand there for 90 seconds without moving and without speaking, which was not something Ryan Calloway did. Ryan was not a person who froze, was not a person who hesitated, had spent 12 years running toward burning buildings as a professional baseline for how he operated under pressure. And there he stood, frozen, in a backyard, because a woman he had never spoken to was standing 40 feet away talking to someone he didn't know. Tyler had said, "Go talk to her." Ryan had not moved. Tyler had physically taken Ryan by the shoulders, turned him toward Chelsea, and pushed him. Not gently. Go. Ryan had crossed that backyard and introduced himself and talked to Chelsea for 2 hours, and Tyler had watched from across the yard with the satisfaction of someone who has identified the correct solution to a problem and implemented it successfully. He had told this story at the wedding, standing at the front of the vineyard with a microphone, and the room had laughed and risen and Chelsea had wiped her eyes and Ryan had buried his face in his hands because the story was accurate and embarrassing and completely true. Tyler had known what Ryan and Chelsea were before either of them did. In September of the following year, 14 months before the wedding, 7 months before the photographs on Chelsea's phone begin, Tyler Ren's divorce from Kristen was finalized. He was living alone in Austin for the first time in years. He was in the same city as Ryan and Chelsea, attending the same dinners and gatherings, present for the engagement celebrations and the early wedding planning conversations, embedded in the architecture of their life together as the closest thing to family Ryan had outside his own blood. The prosecution does not speculate about what happened between Tyler and Chelsea, or when the line was crossed or which of them crossed it first. That is not the prosecution's case to make. What the prosecution establishes, through the photographs Ryan captured between 1:47 and 2:09 a.m. on Wednesday morning, is that something began between them approximately 7 months before the wedding and continued without interruption until 9 days before Ryan stood at the altar. The photographs show messages. They show the existence of a sustained, private connection between Chelsea and Tyler that operated in parallel with everything Chelsea was building with Ryan: the venue tastings, the vow preparations, the dress fittings, the rehearsal dinner, the ceremony itself, the reception where Tyler raised his glass. The photographs do not show anything that requires graphic description. They establish, with complete clarity, the existence and duration of the relationship. That is sufficient. That is, for the purposes of what Ryan Calloway discovered at 1:31 a.m. on his honeymoon, more than sufficient. Now the message arrives. Chelsea's phone is lying on the bedside table, screen facing up. The villa is silent in the way that only a structure built over open water can be silent. No traffic, no mechanical noise, no human sound from adjacent rooms, nothing but the slow movement of the Indian Ocean 4 meters below the floorboards. Chelsea has her notifications set to low. Low is enough. The chime is small and the room is completely quiet, and the sound reaches across 18 inches of dark air to the man lying beside her. The screen lights up. The notification banner appears. The sender's name appears above the preview text. Chelsea does not wake up. The Wi-Fi log for Villa 14 records no activity on Chelsea's phone following the notification delivery at 1:31 and 7 seconds a.m. No screen unlock. No app open. No data packet consistent with a message being read. She slept through it. The phone sat on the bedside table with Tyler Ren's name on the screen and his 4 words visible in the preview, and the display held for 30 seconds and then faded back to black and the room returned to silence. But Ryan was awake. He had woken at the sound, or had not been asleep. This is not inference. It is established by the chain of what happens in the minutes that follow, by the precision of the timestamps, by the specific and deliberate nature of everything he does from this moment forward. He was awake. He saw the screen. He saw the name he had known since 7th grade. The name that had been beside him at every significant moment of his adult life. The name of the man who had pushed him across a backyard 3 years ago because somebody had to. The name of the man who had driven 4 hours to a hospital without being asked. The name of the man who had stood at the front of a vineyard 2 weeks ago and told 160 people that Ryan Calloway was the best man he knew. That name, on his wife's phone, at 1:31 a.m., on his honeymoon. Ryan did not put the phone down. Those 37 minutes, between 1:31 a.m. when the notification arrives and 1:47 a.m. when his own phone camera first activates, are the center of this story, and they are unreachable. No camera covered them. No log captured them. No backup preserved whatever happened inside Ryan Calloway during that window. What lives there is not evidence. It is only the weight of imagining a man lying in the dark in a villa he saved 11 months of overtime to afford, holding a phone that is not his, reading a name he knows better than almost any name in his life, in the middle of the Indian Ocean on his honeymoon, for days after the wedding. The speech playing back in his head. The airport 5 days ago. The hug at the gate. Enjoy every second. The push across the backyard 3 years ago because somebody had to. 22 years of the person he trusted most in the world. All of it arriving simultaneously in the dark at 1:31 a.m. through a forward message sent on a Tuesday afternoon from Austin, Texas. Those 37 minutes are Ryan Calloway's. They will always be his. No court has ever seen inside them, and no court ever will. At 1:47 a.m., Ryan opens his own phone's camera and begins photographing Chelsea's screen. The iCloud backup that will preserve these photographs records each one with complete metadata precision. The exact second of capture, the device identifier, the GPS coordinates confirming Villa 14 at the Conrad Rangali Island. He works through Chelsea's phone systematically. The message thread first. Its full history. Its full length. Then other content. Screen by screen, each one framed carefully, each one captured completely. The prosecution's digital forensics expert, Dr. Patricia Malloy, notes during trial testimony that the interval between photographs averages 90 seconds. Not 10 seconds. Not 30. 90 seconds between each frame. The framing is consistent throughout. The focus is clean. None of the 12 images are blurred by unsteady hands or compromised by poor angle. Each screen is fully legible. Dr. Malloy tells the jury, "This is not the documentation of a man who has shattered. This is the documentation of a man who is thinking. A trained first responder who has spent 12 years practicing clarity under acute stress, applying that training to the task of preserving evidence before it disappears." The last photograph is timestamped 2:09 a.m. At 2:14 a.m., 5 minutes later, Ryan's phone performs its automatic nightly iCloud backup. The camera roll uploads silently and completely. All 143 photographs. The backup completes. The cloud copy exists. Ryan does not know this. He does not know that 2:14 a.m. is his device's scheduled backup window, that the sync completed 5 minutes before he begins deleting, that every image he removes from his local storage already exists in a server he cannot reach. He deletes the photographs one by one. Individually, manually, each one requiring a separate action and a separate confirmation tab, a process that takes several minutes to complete. He deletes them the way a person deletes things they have decided should not be found. The cloud copy survives intact. It is waiting. The most recent photograph on Chelsea's phone, the last screen Ryan documents before putting her phone down at 2:09 a.m., is dated 9 days before the wedding. 9 days before the vineyard. The vows without notes. The speech that made the room stand up. 9 days before Tyler raised his glass at the front of that room and told everyone in it that he had never seen Ryan scared of anything until that 4th of July backyard, and that he had pushed him because somebody had to, and that he was standing here today because Ryan had gone. 9 days. The prosecution does not editorialize this. The timeline editorializes itself. What happens between 2:14 a.m. and 6:19 a.m. is the wound at the center of this case that does not close and will not close. The Maldivian state pathologist places Chelsea's time of death between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. The medical examiner's findings are consistent with sustained blunt force trauma. There is no DNA from an unknown individual anywhere in the villa. The patio doors are locked from the inside. Nothing is missing. No camera captured any intruder. The physical record points in one direction and does not waver. Chelsea Callaway did not run from whoever killed her. She did not have time. Or she did not know she needed to. Chelsea Walsh had wanted to see the Maldives since she was 23 years old. She had not yet updated her name on her accounts. Not her email, not her social profiles, not the small digital infrastructure of a life that always lags a few weeks behind the larger fact of a life changing. She was still Chelsea Walsh in her phone settings and her streaming subscriptions and the password manager she used for everything. There was time. She had been Chelsea Walsh for 31 years, and she had 7 nights in a villa above the Indian Ocean before any of it needed to be dealt with. She had shown Ryan the photograph on her phone during their 3rd date, a picture saved to a folder she kept for places she was not yet certain were real, places that belonged to the category of someday if everything works out. She held the phone toward him and said, "Is that an actual color? Not quite a question, more of an objection, the way you object to something making an argument too beautiful to easily accept." Ryan had looked at the photograph for a moment and then at her and said he'd find out for her someday. She had laughed and changed the subject because it was their 3rd date and it was too early in the history of them to notice that when Ryan said things he meant them completely and followed through without exception. He had meant it. 3 years later, he had 11 months of overtime shifts and 1 overwater villa at the Rangali Island in 7 nights and a ring he had paid off over 15 months and vows he had memorized during overnight shifts at Station 6. He had researched the property for 4 months before booking. Read every review on every platform. Studied the villa orientations for sunset positioning. Called the resort directly to confirm the water depth beneath Villa 14's glass floor panel because Chelsea had mentioned once, in a conversation 9 months earlier that Ryan had stored and never discarded, that she found looking down through clear water peaceful rather than frightening, that it felt like looking up at sky rather than down at distance. He had booked the villa she would have chosen for herself if choosing had ever felt real enough to actually do. Chelsea's cloud backup, recovered during the investigation and forensically examined under the bilateral legal assistance agreement governing the case, preserves 47 photographs taken between Saturday arrival and Tuesday morning. It preserves her message threads and her voice memos and the video she captured on the seaplane transfer down from Malé. Investigators work through this material in the 2nd week of the investigation, after Ryan's iCloud backup has already shifted the entire direction of the case. They examine Chelsea's digital record not because she is under investigation, but because a victim's preserved record is the most accurate available account of the days preceding their death. What felt normal? What began to shift? What the victim themselves noticed and what passed beneath their awareness. Chelsea's record is detailed and consistent with who she was. She was a person who documented her life carefully, who sent long messages rather than short ones, who took photographs of food before eating it and sunsets before they faded, and, in a series of images investigators find early in the camera roll and cannot quite move past Ryan's face when he was looking at something else and had no idea she was pointing the camera at him. In those photographs, he is not posed. He is not performing anything. He is just looking at the water or reading a menu or laughing at something on the dive boat, and Chelsea has framed him with the attention of someone who looks at a person and sees something they want to keep. Those photographs of Ryan stop on Tuesday morning. They are the last photographs Chelsea takes. After 11:14 a.m. Tuesday, her camera roll is empty. The seaplane video is 11 seconds long. Chelsea holds the camera outward, both faces in the frame, the turquoise water of the South Ari Atoll stretching to the horizon behind them. Ryan is laughing at something from the seconds before she pressed record, still caught in the tail end of it, and Chelsea's voice says this doesn't feel real and Ryan says it is though. I promise it is, and the frame wobbles slightly as the seaplane hits a pocket of air and Chelsea laughs at the wobble and the video ends. The resort's seaplane host, Ahmed, interviewed by investigators on Thursday, says he remembers the couple from Villa 14 before he is shown photographs. He says they had been the kind of arrivals that reminded him why he found his job worthwhile. He says Chelsea had pressed her face against the window for the entire 25-minute flight down from Malé. He says Ryan had spent most of that same flight watching Chelsea do it. Ahmed searches for the right word for Ryan's expression and settles, after a pause, on grateful. Not happy, he clarifies. Grateful. Like someone watching something they had been waiting a long time to see actually happening in front of them. Saturday is documented in 17 photographs. The villa at first arrival, the glass floor panel, the deck view, the outdoor rain shower, the minibar that Ryan had pre-stocked with Chelsea's preferences through a special request form submitted to the resort 3 weeks before arrival. Chelsea photographs the minibar and sends it to Jess with the caption, "He literally called ahead, I cannot." Sunday is 14 photographs and a voice note Chelsea sends to Jess at 9:14 a.m. Chelsea standing on the reef in ankle-deep water. The recording capturing small waves and her own voice saying, "Jess, I am literally standing on a coral reef in the Indian Ocean with my actual feet." Ryan is trying to photograph a turtle that will not cooperate. "I have never been happier in my life. That's it. That's the whole voice note." Chelsea's Sunday evening message to Helen reads, "Helen, I am going to cry at literally everything this week. It is so beautiful and Ree is so happy. He keeps looking at me like he can't believe we're actually here. I can't believe we're actually here either. I'll call when we're back. I love you so much." Helen Walsh saves that message. She reads it approximately once a day for the first year. She does not move it to any folder or archive. She does not put a single additional tap between herself and the ability to open it whenever she needs to. She tells the victim's family attorney, during a deposition 8 months after the verdict, that she sometimes reads it in the morning before she gets out of bed and sometimes in the evening before she goes to sleep, and that it does not get easier but it does not get harder either. It is just Chelsea. It is just Chelsea, being happy, being completely unaware. Helen says, "That's the hardest part. Not the grief. The unawareness. She was so happy and she had no idea." Ryan's Sunday evening call to his mother Linda lasts 14 minutes. Linda speaks to investigators months after the arrest, initiating the contact herself, having carried something she needed to say aloud to someone who would receive it professionally rather than personally. She says Ryan had sounded, on that Sunday call from the villa, like a man who had finally put down something heavy. She uses exactly that image, put something down, and does not elaborate on it, as though the image is complete and requires nothing added. She says he had been working hard for so long, the overtime and the saving and the planning, and every time they spoke that year she had heard in him the held-breath quality of someone running toward a finish line and trying not to look at it too directly. On Sunday from the villa he had sounded like the finish line had arrived and he was standing still inside it for the first time. She says he told her the water was the color of Chelsea's eyes at a certain angle of light. She says he laughed at himself immediately, called himself embarrassing, said, "Forget I said that." She told him he was not embarrassing at all. She says he went quiet in the way he always had since childhood when something landed in him that he didn't have language for yet. Then he said, "Thank you, Mom," and they talked for a few more minutes about nothing particular and said goodbye. She thinks about that phone call every day. She says this simply, without performance, as a statement of plain fact. Every day. Monday is snorkeling photographs and a voice memo Chelsea records at 7:43 p.m. standing on the villa deck with no apparent purpose. The recorder simply running for 22 seconds, capturing the sound of the ocean and Chelsea's quiet breathing and, at the 17-second mark, a small private laugh. The laugh of someone whose own thoughts have briefly, satisfyingly amused them. No context. No explanation. Just a woman standing on a deck above the Indian Ocean on a Monday evening, alone for a moment, laughing at something inside her own head. The memo ends. Chelsea presumably put the phone down and looked at the water. The prosecution does not enter this memo as formal evidence. They enter it as context through Chelsea's family attorney during the victim impact proceedings. In a pretrial deposition, the attorney plays it once in a room containing investigators, prosecutors, and Helen Walsh. The room does not move for the full 22 seconds. Then it moves again and everyone in it carries the sound of that laugh into everything that follows and does not put it down. 22 seconds of Chelsea alive, happy, unaware, laughing at something private while the ocean moved beneath the floorboards. Not knowing and having no reason to know that in 30 hours a notification would arrive on the bedside table and the week she believed she was living would become the last week of her life. Tuesday is where the record breaks. The photographs stop at 11:14 a.m. 47 photographs across 3.5 days and then nothing. The message thread with Jess, active and warm and continuous since Saturday arrival, goes quiet at 3:47 p.m. Chelsea's final message to Jess reads, "Ree seems weird today, like quieter than normal. He keeps checking his phone and I asked if everything was okay and he said yes, but something is off. Probably just tired, honestly. The time difference is brutal. I'm probably making it into something. This place is insane, by the way. I'll send photos when we're back." Jess responds 11 minutes later, "You're definitely overthinking, LOL, enjoy yourself." Chelsea sends one emoji. The thread ends. She does not message Jess again. She does not message Helen. She does not send a voice note or take a photograph or communicate with anyone after 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon. Her last outgoing communication to any recipient is that single emoji. Her last received message arrives at 1:31 a.m. Wednesday. The gap between those two moments, Chelsea's last sent emoji at 3:47 p.m. and Tyler's incoming message at 1:31 a.m., is 10 hours and 44 minutes. Investigators closed that gap through the resort staff. The waiter at the Coco Grill Tuesday evening, Hussein, 24, from Adu Atoll, 18 months at the Conrad, remembers the couple from Villa 14 immediately when shown photographs 2 days later and has clearly been thinking about it since Wednesday morning. He says they were quiet at dinner. He makes the distinction carefully and unprompted. Not unhappy, just quieter than the previous evenings when he had seen them from across the outdoor deck and heard them laughing in the uninhibited way of guests who have temporarily forgotten that other people are nearby. He says Ryan had barely touched his food. He says Chelsea had ordered the mango dessert and eaten most of it and thanked him when he cleared the plate with a smile he describes as polite and automatic. He says she seemed fine. He pauses and then adds that he has thought about that description many times since Wednesday and is still not sure it is wrong, only that it is incomplete. Fine is what he saw. Fine is all there was to see. The rest was happening somewhere he could not observe. The villa walkway camera records Ryan and Chelsea returning from dinner at 11:17 p.m. They are walking side by side. They are not touching. This is the detail the investigators note immediately when they review the footage because in every previous piece of resort camera footage containing Ryan and Chelsea, the seaplane dock on Saturday, the path to the house reef on Sunday morning, the return from the spa on Monday afternoon, they are in some form of physical contact with each other. A hand at the small of a back. An arm across a shoulder. The automatic, unthinking proximity of two people who have spent 3 years learning the geography of each other and have just recently made it permanent. At 11:17 p.m. Tuesday, there is a gap of approximately 2 feet between them on the jetty. Not hostile. Not dramatic. No visible posture of conflict or anger. Just an absence. The absence of something that had been constant for 3 days and was now gone. Chelsea is half a step ahead. Ryan is behind and to her right. They walk the full length of the jetty without speaking and disappear into Villa 14 at 11:19 p.m. The villa lights remain on until 12:44 a.m. 1 hour and 25 minutes of lit windows and then darkness. Then silence. Then 47 minutes of the ocean moving in the dark beneath the floorboards. Then at 1:31 a.m., a chime. A screen lighting up on the bedside table. A notification banner resolving into a name above 4 words sent from Austin, Texas, at 2:31 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon by the man who had stood at the gate 5 days ago with his arms open. Who had given the speech. Who had pushed Ryan across a backyard 3 years ago because somebody had to. Who had known what Ryan and Chelsea were before either of them did. And who had, it turns out, known Chelsea in a different way for 7 months while standing inside the architecture of everything Ryan was building. Somewhere in the dark, Ryan Calloway reaches for a phone that is not his. The world he has been building since that 4th of July party. Every overtime shift, every payment, every version of every vow, every carefully chosen word said on a rooftop at sunset without notes, without looking away, comes apart in the space of a notification banner in the silence of a villa above water in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The jetty camera picks up no movement for 37 minutes. The resort is completely silent. The ocean moves beneath the floorboards. And somewhere in the unreachable dark of those 37 minutes, in a room no camera covered and no log preserved and no court ever fully saw, Ryan Calloway is alone with 22 years of friendship and 4 words from Austin and a knowledge that has just made a ruin of everything he understood about his own life. What he does with those 37 minutes is the question this story cannot answer. What he does after them is the record. And the record does not forgive. The Maldivian police service operates out of a main station in Malé and maintains a smaller marine unit that covers the resort islands of the South Ari Atoll. Response time from the nearest station to the Conrad Rangali is approximately 47 minutes by speedboat in calm water. The detective who leads the initial investigation, a senior officer named Ibrahim Rashid, 19 years on the force, the kind of investigator who speaks quietly and writes everything down, arrives at the resort at 10:34 a.m. on Wednesday. He has been briefed by radio during the transit. Woman found dead in villa. Husband on premises. No signs of forced entry. No signs of robbery. He has worked 11 homicide cases in his career. He tells his junior officer during the boat ride that the absence of robbery in a resort villa is the most important detail in the briefing. In his experience, when nothing is taken, everything is personal. He meets Ryan Calloway at the resort manager's office at 10:51 a.m. Ryan is sitting in a chair against the wall. He has been given water and a change of clothes by resort staff. The gray t-shirt and bare feet have been replaced by a clean white shirt that belongs to someone else and sits slightly wrong across his shoulders. He stands when Rashid enters. He shakes the detective's hand. Rashid notes in his written record that Ryan's handshake is firm, that his eyes are clear, that there is no visible trembling, no redness around the eyes consistent with recent crying, no physiological presentation of acute grief that Rashid would typically expect from a man whose wife of 4 days has just been found dead in their honeymoon villa. Rashid notes all of this without conclusion. He has learned over 19 years that grief presents differently in different people. He has learned that the absence of visible distress does not constitute evidence of anything except the absence of visible distress. He notes it and he moves on. He asks Ryan to walk him through the night. Ryan's account is delivered without hesitation and without inconsistency across 3 separate tellings, to Rashid on Wednesday morning, to a second investigator Wednesday afternoon, and to a joint Maldivian and American consular interview on Thursday. The account does not change. Ryan says he and Chelsea returned from dinner at approximately 11:15 p.m. He says they went to bed around midnight. He says he woke at approximately 3 a.m. and found Chelsea's side of the bed empty. He searched the villa, the bathroom, the outdoor shower, the deck, the pool. He found her in the bedroom. The door had been pulled partially closed, which is why he hadn't seen her immediately. He found her on the floor. He did not touch her. He did not know what to do. He went to the jetty to think. He sat there for a while. Then he called the front desk. Rashid asks whether Chelsea had seemed distressed the previous evening. Ryan says she had seemed tired. Rashid asks whether they had argued. Ryan says no. Rashid asks whether Ryan had received any calls or messages during the night that he remembers. Ryan says no. He does not mention the notification at 1:31 a.m. He does not mention picking up Chelsea's phone. He does not mention Tyler Ren. He does not mention 22 minutes of photographs or the deletion that followed. He sits in the chair in the borrowed white shirt that fits wrong across his shoulders, and he answers every question he is asked, and he volunteers nothing. Rashid, reviewing his notes that evening, circles the word tired, the word Ryan had used to describe Chelsea, and writes beside it a single question mark. Not because the word is impossible, because it is the most neutral word available, and Ryan had reached for it without pausing. The first 72 hours of the investigation proceed along two tracks simultaneously. The first track is the physical evidence. The medical examiner's preliminary findings confirm blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Multiple impacts. The pattern and distribution of injuries is consistent with a sustained assault rather than a single blow or a fall. There is no DNA from an unknown individual recovered from Chelsea's body or from anywhere in the villa. The toxicology results, which take longer to process, will later confirm no sedative or intoxicant in Chelsea's system beyond a blood alcohol level of 0.04, consistent with the wine at dinner, consistent with a woman who had 2 glasses and went to bed. She was not incapacitated. She was not drugged. She was asleep in her own bed in her own villa, and she was killed there, and there is no physical evidence that anyone other than her husband was present. The second track is the digital evidence, and this is where the investigation breaks open. On day 3, at the request of the investigating team, the Conrad Rangali's IT manager pulls the full Wi-Fi activity log for Villa 14 covering the period of Ryan and Chelsea's stay. This is a routine request in a resort homicide. Digital logs can establish timelines, confirm or contradict stated accounts, occasionally surface contact with the outside world that a suspect has not disclosed. The IT manager exports the log and provides it to investigators on a Thursday morning. The log is 340 pages of raw network data. A junior investigator named Ferris, 26 years old, 2 years out of the Maldives National University's computing program, assigned to the case because of his technical background, spends Thursday afternoon working through it. He flags the iCloud backup at 2:14 a.m. Wednesday. Not because backups are unusual. Phones back up to cloud servers every night. The logs are full of routine sync traffic. Ferris flags this particular entry because of its size. The 2:14 a.m. backup from Ryan's device is significantly larger than the backup from the same device on Monday night and Sunday night, the 2 previous evenings for which the log has data. The Monday backup is 47 megabytes. The Sunday backup is 52 megabytes. The Wednesday backup, the one completed 5 minutes before Ryan began deleting photographs, is 340 megabytes. The difference is approximately 290 megabytes of data that did not exist in Ryan's camera roll on Monday night and did exist at 2:14 a.m. Wednesday. Ferris brings the discrepancy to Rashid. Rashid looks at it for a long time. Then he looks at the timestamp. Then he looks at the time of death window the medical examiner has established. Then he calls his supervisor. The following morning, Maldivian authorities issue a formal legal request to Apple through the Interpol Emergency Data Preservation Channel. The request asks Apple to preserve and provide the content of the iCloud backup associated with Ryan Calloway's Apple ID, timestamped 2:14 a.m. on Wednesday from the IP address registered to Villa 14 at the Conrad Rangali Island, Maldives. Apple complies within 18 hours under the emergency provision. The backup is preserved. The 143 photographs are extracted intact. The metadata on each image is complete, timestamp, device ID, GPS coordinates, file size, sequence number. The last 12 photographs in the sequence, taken between 1:47 a.m. and 2:09 a.m., show Chelsea's phone screen in a series of systematic, carefully framed, fully legible images. Rashid reviews the photographs on a Saturday morning in his office in Malé with the door closed. He looks at them for a long time. Then he calls the American consulate and tells them the nature of what he has found. Then he issues a formal hold order preventing Ryan Calloway from leaving the Maldives pending further investigation. Ryan has been staying in a resort guest room since Wednesday, not detained, technically, but asked to remain available. When the hold order is served to him on Saturday afternoon through the consulate's liaison officer, Ryan receives it without visible reaction. His attorney, David Ferris, has flown in from Austin by this point. Ferris advises Ryan to say nothing further. Ryan says nothing further. He has already said everything he is going to say. The account he gave on Wednesday morning is the account he will maintain through arraignment, through extradition proceedings, through the entirety of the trial. He will never update it. He will never explain the photographs. He will never testify. The jury will never hear his voice describe those 37 minutes. Ryan Calloway is formally arrested on Monday, 6 days after Chelsea's body was found, and charged with murder under Maldivian law. The charge carries the possibility of life imprisonment. The arrest is made quietly, in the guest room where Ryan has been staying. At 7:15 a.m. Ferris is present. Ryan is handcuffed and walked to a waiting police boat. A resort staff member who sees the arrest from the pathway later tells a journalist that Ryan walked to the boat without resistance and without speaking, and that his expression was the same expression he'd had on the jetty, that contained held stillness, as though the outside of him had decided not to register anything the inside was doing. The case is transferred to the Maldivian High Court and simultaneously flagged for potential extradition to the United States under the bilateral legal assistance treaty signed between the two countries. Chelsea's family, represented by a Fort Worth attorney named Marcus Chun, files for extradition on the grounds that Ryan is an American citizen. The victim is an American citizen, and the family's interest in the prosecution proceeding under a legal system they can fully access and monitor is legitimate and pressing. The extradition process takes 4 months. Ryan serves the interim period in the Dunedhu detention facility outside Malé. He makes no statements. He writes no letters, or none that are logged by facility staff. He reads. He sleeps. He waits. The trial begins on a Monday 9 months after Chelsea Callaway was found on the floor of Villa 14 in the dress she had worn to dinner. The prosecution's opening statement lasts 1 hour and 40 minutes. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Okonkwo who has spent 11 years in the Travis County District Attorney's Office and who was specifically assigned to this case because of her experience with digital evidence in domestic homicide prosecutions, begins not with the photographs and not with the jetty footage and not with the medical examiner's findings. She begins with the ring. She tells the jury about the 18 months of payments. She tells them about Diane Okafor at the South Congress jeweler, about Ryan coming in twice just to look at it, about the spilled water glass and the 3 apologies and the man who said I'm the lucky one with a sincerity that a jeweler remembered clearly enough to repeat in a deposition 2 years later. She tells the jury about the roof proposal and the vows written on overnight shifts and the string quartet playing the wrong song while Chelsea laughed instead of crying. She tells them about 11 months of overtime for 1 week in one villa above the Indian Ocean. She does this for 20 minutes before she mentions Tyler Ren. When she does mention him, she does it simply. She says, Ryan Calloway built something for 3 years with extraordinary care and extraordinary love and extraordinary patience. She says, at the same time, inside the phone his wife carried in her bag, something else was happening. Something that had been happening for 7 of those months. She says, on the night of the 14th, the Tuesday of the honeymoon, the evening of the penultimate day of Chelsea's life, a notification arrived on Chelsea's phone from the man who had been Ryan's closest friend since 7th grade. She reads the message to the jury in full. Thinking about you. Miss you already. She pauses. She says, Tyler Ren sent that message from Austin, Texas, at 2:31 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, while his best friend sat in a villa above the Indian Ocean on his honeymoon. She says, he sent it to the same phone he had been sending messages to for 7 months. She says, he sent it without apparent concern for consequence because 7 months of contact had made consequence feel theoretical. She then presents the photographs. The digital forensics expert who testifies on day 2 of the trial is a former FBI examiner named Dr. Patricia Malloy, now in private practice, whose 17 years of experience with cloud-based evidence in criminal proceedings has resulted in testimony in 34 federal cases. She walks the jury through the iCloud architecture, the automatic backup schedule, the size discrepancy Ferris had flagged in the Wi-Fi log, the preservation request, the extraction. She presents the 143 photographs in sequence on the courtroom display. She narrates each of the final 12 with the same measured, clinical tone, timestamp, content, interval from previous photograph. She notes the 90-second average interval. She notes the consistent framing. She notes the complete legibility of each screen captured. She tells the jury that in her professional assessment, the documentation of Chelsea's phone between 1:47 a.m. and 2:09 a.m. is consistent with a person operating with deliberate cognitive control under conditions of acute emotional stress. She uses a specific phrase that the jury will later reference in their deliberation notes. Purposeful evidence gathering. Not reactive. Not impulsive. Purposeful. The defense presents its case across 3 days. David Ferris is a skilled attorney and he works with what he has. He presents the betrayal first and in full, making the strategic decision to control the jury's emotional encounter with it rather than allowing the prosecution to frame it entirely as motive. He shows the 7-month timeline. He shows the wedding photographs alongside the dates of the messages. He shows the airport goodbye, Tyler hugging Ryan at the gate, the timestamp, the 1:31 a.m. message 5 days later. He does not minimize what Chelsea did or what Tyler did. He asks the jury to sit with the full weight of what Ryan Calloway had discovered, not to excuse it, but to understand the psychological conditions under which it occurred. He argues that the documentation of Chelsea's phone, while deliberate in appearance, can be understood as the behavior of a man in traumatic shock reaching instinctively for the professional habit of evidence preservation. A man whose entire working life has been built around the imperative to document before acting. He argues this does not indicate premeditation. It indicates training overriding emotion in the first minutes of an unbearable discovery. He argues that what followed was not planned, that it was a rupture, that the law must account for the difference between a man who plans a murder and a man who breaks. Okonkwo's rebuttal is precise and methodical, and it takes the jury where she intends. She returns to the interval, 90 seconds between photographs, 22 minutes of documentation, then deletion, then, and this is the phrase she uses in her closing, the phrase that the jury foreman will later tell a journalist he could not stop thinking about during deliberations, then 4 hours of silence. 4 hours between the completion of the backup and the call to the front desk. 4 hours that are not accounted for by shock, not accounted for by paralysis, not accounted for by a man who has broken beyond function. 4 hours during which, at some point, Chelsea Callaway was killed. And then Ryan Calloway put on a gray t-shirt and walked to the end of a jetty and sat for 41 minutes facing the water. Not calling anyone. Not running back. Not behaving in any way consistent with a man who has just discovered his wife dead and is processing what that means. Sitting. Still. Waiting for the morning to come so he could report it. She tells the jury, "This is not what breaking looks like. This is what deciding looks like." Tyler Ren testifies on day 6. He is subpoenaed. He has no legal avenue of refusal. He arrives at the courthouse in Austin. The extradition agreement includes provisions for remote testimony via secure video link. In a gray suit, his face carrying something that is not quite grief and not quite guilt and exists somewhere in the unmarked territory between them. He confirms the relationship. He confirms the timeline. He confirms the 7 months, the messages, the photographs, the most recent image dated 9 days before the wedding. He confirms the 1:31 a.m. message. He confirms he was in Austin when he sent it. He confirms he attended the airport send-off party and hugged Ryan at the gate and told him to enjoy every second. His voice is steady throughout his testimony, which several journalists covering the trial note and which Chelsea's mother Helen, watching via livestream from Fort Worth, will later describe as the detail that made her angriest of everything she witnessed in the entire proceedings. Not what he said. That his voice was steady while he said it. Ferris does not cross-examine Tyler Ren at length. There is no useful angle. Tyler has confirmed everything the prosecution needed him to confirm, and the additional damage of a prolonged cross-examination outweighs any benefit. Ferris asks 2 questions. He asks whether Tyler had any knowledge that Ryan had discovered the relationship before Chelsea's death. Tyler says no. He asks whether Tyler had any contact with Ryan between the night of the wedding and Chelsea's death. Tyler says no. Ferris thanks him and sits down. Tyler's video link is disconnected. He is not seen publicly again for a long time. The jury deliberates for 14 hours across 2 days. They return a verdict of second-degree murder. Ryan Calloway is sentenced to 25 years. Under the terms of the extradition agreement and the bilateral treaty provisions, he will serve his sentence in a federal correctional facility in Texas. He is 34 years old at sentencing. His earliest possible release date is when he is 59 years old. He stands for the reading of the verdict in the same way he sat on the jetty, completely still, contained, the exterior of him presenting nothing that the interior is not prepared to show. He does not speak. He does not look at Chelsea's family in the gallery. His mother Linda is in the courtroom. When the sentence is read, she makes a sound that the court reporter later describes simply as a sound of pain and leaves it at that. Chelsea's mother Helen gives a victim impact statement that lasts 6 minutes. She does not address Ryan directly. She does not mention Tyler Ren. She talks about Chelsea, about the pressed flowers in every book she owned since childhood, about the Sunday pancakes burned on purpose because Chelsea claimed the first one was a sacrifice to the process, about the voice message Chelsea sent from the seaplane transfer on Saturday saying this doesn't feel real and the way Ryan's voice had said back it is though. I promise it is. She says she has listened to that voice message more times than she can count. She says she will listen to it for the rest of her life. She says she does not know what else to say except that Chelsea deserved the week she thought she was going to have. Deserved to come home with photographs of the water and stories about the reef and a marriage that was going to be everything she had believed it would be. She says Chelsea deserved the man Ryan had been before that villa. She says she grieves for that man too sometimes and that she is not sure how to feel about that. She sits down. The courtroom is very quiet for a moment before the judge speaks. Ryan Calloway is led out of the courtroom through a side door. Station 6 on East Oltorf quietly retires his equipment number. His name comes down from the years of service board. The locker that was his for 12 years is cleared and left empty for 3 months before anyone can bring themselves to reassign it. Captain Marcus Webb, asked by a journalist outside the station whether he has anything to say, stops walking for a moment. He looks at the ground. He says, he should have walked out of that room. He had other choices. He made the one he made. He goes back inside. He does not give another statement. Tyler Ren's apartment in Austin is empty by the end of the month following the verdict. A neighbor sees him loading boxes into a moving truck on a Tuesday morning. Alone, no destination mentioned, no goodbyes given to anyone who knew Ryan. He has not spoken publicly. He has not given interviews. The social media accounts are gone. The phone number is changed. He moves through the legal aftermath of his testimony and out the other side into a life that continues, quietly, privately, carrying whatever it is that a person carries when they have sent a text message on a Tuesday afternoon that set in motion the end of 2 people they claim to love. There is no charge to file against Tyler Ren. There is no law he broke. He disappears into that fact. The Conrad Rangali Island continues operating. Villa 14 is rebooked within the standard window. The walkway jetty camera continues recording motion at its base. The iCloud servers continue performing nightly backups of the devices connected to the resort's Wi-Fi. The South Ari Atoll continues existing in its impossible colors. Somewhere in a federal correctional facility in Texas, Ryan Calloway. Sentence in a place with no ocean visible in any direction. And in the gap between 1:31 a.m. and 1:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, 37 minutes that no camera covered and no log preserved and no forensic tool could ever reach, whatever happened to Ryan Calloway in the dark of that villa above the water remains exactly what it was from the beginning. Uncovered.